All right. Take 400 with Paul Hubbard.
Only as few as that, hey?
Yeah, exactly. Welcome back, my friend. We get so many messages actually from people saying, "Man, we should have this guy on more often." That's why I have keep asking you to come back on.
Well, that's very kind, Robbie. Thank you. It's only a pleasure, hey?
For those of you that may not know Paul Hubbard, why don't you introduce yourself? Anthropologist, historian, philosopher, man of many words in a speech.
Well, thank you, Robbie. I'm Paul. I'm an archaeologist by trade, but also nowadays spend a lot of very happy times as a guide working in Zimbabwe, taking guests around to all sorts of places and sites and sharing what I know about it. And then, also keep busy with my research and writing. I've actually just finished writing a new book, which will
So
be
you
up
can
next
work on
year.
the treaties next that we've been talking about. Oh, perfect
Well,
timing.
it is actually, and the new book is on the life of King Lobengula, who, of course, was such a key player in what we're going to talk about today with the pre-colonial, prehistoric ivory trade and use in Africa. And King Lobengula was one of the linchpins in the internal networks. And so I've just finished writing a biography of his. And I found so many references to ivory that I've started a whole new folder on that for what we've talked about, offline and by
Amazing.
email and all that.
No, it's such a fascinating subject, man. I think that a lot of people, and the reason why I wanted to have this topic of discussion, and obviously it may transform into multiple. Um, I'm a dare I say I'm a student of rhetoric, and I'm always looking for things that will debunk rhetoric, whether it's science, anecdotal information, simple visual information. Like yesterday, I came up with this idea of some new content. And the idea is there's rhetoric that, again, people use all the time against us. Oh, you hunters are just a bunch of killers.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so how do I disprove that? Or you guys are just trophy hunters. You just go out and you kill the biggest thing. That's all you're interested in. Well, how do I disprove that? Well, there's a bunch of hunting videos on the web that people have loaded that
Mm-hmm.
disprove it all the time. So I found two videos yesterday that I just I ripped off the internet, and then I almost like movie critiqued it for
Nice.
the rhetoric. Like this guy shot a caribou in Norway. It was an old cull bull, clearly not the biggest trophy. Because in the picture you can see much bigger caribou, and he chose to shoot that one. And the
No, well,
fact that there
that's
were 60 other caribou standing there that he didn't plow down, I did already twice yesterday. I sent it to my team. I was like, "What do you think about this?" And I said, "There's oodles and oodles of content." Now, before we continue, can you please close your email?
my
Uh,
apologies. Yes, just done it.
Thank you, because you know such a popular individual will just be dinging all the way through this podcast. Um, but no, the piece of rhetoric that started this conversation between us is this idea that these large tuskers are becoming rarer and rarer and rarer in the African system, and in my brain, I'm just like, it's not. This isn't the first time that elephants have been quote unquote persecuted, and I wouldn't even call it persecution at this stage of the game. Very selective taking of big animals in an elephant population that arguably today, at I would say it's over 500,000, is pushing it up against its population expansion opportunity goals, whatever you want to call it. I just don't think that we can take more elephants than what we have with the given habitat that we have in the southern African countries: Namibia, Botswana, Zimbabwe, South Africa. There's a little bit of space left in Mozambique. Tanzania's full. Kenya, there's still space in Kenya. Obviously, Malawi, but those southern African, East African countries that hunt. And so it's like, has there been any pressure on elephants in the past, which almost points the finger to, like, well, if the idea of persecution of big elephants with big ivory is a true research statement, then why do we still have big elephants today?
Yeah, it's a fair question,
Because millions, you're about to tell me, millions and millions and millions of tons of ivory have left Africa.
And again, that's also centuries and centuries of selective hunting, if you want to call it that. Especially
Well, even going back down to the original guy. I think I told you when we first tried this, I was reading a book called White Hunters, Black Poachers.
Yeah.
And in that book, it talks about like this guy. I can't remember his name. I think his name was Moses Kutui or something like that. He was like the most famous African ivory trader on the Tanzanian coast. And he was well known for selecting very big ivory with very big elephants because he knew it was more valuable to trade.
Absolutely. It's when it comes to the question of the use of elephants, and for this discussion I just want to keep it to African elephants as well, because of course
100%.
We could start looking at how people used mammoths, how people used elephants in India, China. So I think we'll just set that as a broad guideline. Otherwise, we will have lots of discussions as well. And one of my favorite things as an archaeologist is with those sorts of questions where it's like, well, why do we still have big tuskers left? It leads you down a fantastic rabbit hole of understanding archaeology, genetics, elephant growth patterns, and also distribution and status of elephants over centuries. And you realize it's a very muddled mess with a lot of fantastic work done in little areas, but also a need for a synthesis, which has also got a little thing ticking in the back of my brain, having been doing some reading for this. Because also, if I waved some of my reading at you, I've got behind the camera here, I've got a pile of probably 70 books that I've been reading about this topic on elephants, as well as ivory trade, general trade in Africa before colonization. And, one of the fun things that I've learned is that, we in Southern Africa, to start with, we've got evidence of exploitation of elephants in this part of the world going back 30,000 years ago. Which is, of course, during the Stone Age. And I don't think people back then were hunting the elephants, but it shows that they're going there, they're cutting up carcasses for meat, and also probably bringing back the big bones for some marrow, especially if it's the younger elephants, before it all starts to harden in their leg bones and stuff. And also maybe we've also there's nascent evidence of them using some of the bones to make early carvings as well, so that shows a connection between people and elephants in this part of the world that's quite ancient. But one of the things that fascinates me when we're talking about why do we want elephants and why do we care about tuskers is it's ivory. That's it, plain and simple. I've seen a lot of big elephants in my lifetime, big males, big females that don't have the most impressive ivory, but you look at this thing and it's 6 tons. That's a huge animal, but then you go, but your tusks are small. And that's the thing that seems to fascinate us humans, is those 2 teeth that come out the front of their face. And why? That's also a question I've got, is why? Everything else about elephants, to me, elephants are symbols of wisdom and power. They also signal many virtues in different cultures. There's loyalty, there's constancy, there's knowledge. Elephants never forget. These are all attributes that we have with them. But when you talk to what a lot of the debate focuses on nowadays is the great empathy for the elephants, and that the fact that they're being poached and is simply for those 2 teeth. And why? And it's one of the most ancient connections between hunting humans, humans as hunters, and elephants, as we want those teeth. The meat, the skin, the bones are always secondary considerations until very, very recently, when we've had more structure and
it's
control.
It's just such a unique material, I think. It's got this quality to it that doesn't absorb heat. It's constantly cool. It's cool to the touch.
Yep. It's lustrous. That's another one is, especially like when you've cleaned ivory, that light that it shines with, I don't know how to explain it. Lustrous is the only word that comes to mind right now. And, the feel of it, I think I mentioned last time, there's an institution that I visit here that we still have ivory billiard balls. And when you play a game with those compared to the modern ones, it's a very different feel. And that click-clack noise is something else. And of course, I always think of the animals that died to give us those balls, but at the same time, you sort of get it. You might not approve, but you get it. And these incisors that we are fascinated with, these tusks, have exerted a fascination for millennia. If we go back to ancient Egypt, 6,000 years ago is when we have a lot of evidence of the beginnings of the use of ivory for what we'd recognize today, for making ornaments, for making jewelry, and also for inlays. The Egyptians made a huge amount of use of ivory and began to actively hunt their elephant populations, starting on the Nile. The upper Nile, which is, it always feels the wrong way around. But anyway, when you think of the way they talk about Egypt, but starting with hunting there and then moving down the Nile into, modern Sudan and further down, and then also into Ethiopia. And one of the things that absolutely horrifies yet fascinates me is Egyptian records, which I've got the book here, reading one of the books on early Egypt and stuff like that. They're reporting that elephants were locally extinct by nearly 3,000 years ago. That they had hunted out all their elephants there just for their ivory. And so now they're starting to have to go further and further afield. And then that sets up these trade networks that are going to be a huge part of our discussion, I hope, today as well. Because the idea of ivory and where it comes from, there's also, even all the way back then, there's preference for ivory from different parts of Africa. There's during the Ptolemaic era of Egypt and North Africa, when the Romans have conquered North Africa and they've got their trading colonies set up all along the Mediterranean and into Egypt and all that. They talk about how they do not like the ivory coming from the desert, which is, of course, coming out of West Africa at that time. And they don't like it. They see it as more brittle, less colorful. It also was often a scene, perception and trying to understand some of the references is seen as smaller. They're talking about the ivory just being smaller and inferior. Those are the most two common words that you read about. Whereas the stuff coming from the south, which by that era, the Ptolemaic era, they've
What are we talking about
most,
in terms of years? What are we talking? 3,000 years ago.
So this is from about 2,500 years ago to 2,000 years ago. With the Roman.
So this is before Christ. This is BC.
Yes.
This is okay.
Correct. Yes. So and coming into the Christian era or common era, as we like to call it nowadays. And one of the things that absolutely fascinates me is they're also wanting elephants, not just for their ivory, but also for use. We see the war elephants, Hannibal being the most famous guy who collects African elephants from North Africa and uses them to invade Rome and cause consternation and chaos amongst the armies. But on top of that, for also spectacle, there's records of elephants being used in very cruel and quite frankly, in my opinion, barbaric ways, for entertainment, bringing them into the Colosseums and having people attack them and try and capture them, but also ride them and have clown displays like modern circuses did with elephants and, African elephants, which is not a thing that we generally associate with them in prehistoric times as well, and early historic times as well. But one of the things that interests me with them is it always comes back to ivory, and something else is that, in ancient Egypt, from 6,000 years ago is when we see the start of the hunting, all the way back into more recent times there. And elephants in that part of the world are locally extinct by 2,000 years ago. There's actually records saying that we haven't seen elephants in anywhere in North Africa, north of the Sahara Desert, basically, from 2,000 years ago, which also shows the massive impact of the demand. And you also then see the use and trade in ivory in Europe at that time. We'll come back to Asia and India just now. But from 2,000 years ago in Europe, ivory disappears as a significant trade good, and many ivory objects become treasured relics, especially very early carvings of ivory for religious icons, especially as Christianity begins its spread from the Middle East into the rest of the world. A lot of early European missionaries and martyrs, travel into these areas and all that. They had ivory carvings of everything from crucifixes to rosary beads and, all sorts of stuff from that very early time. But it just disappears out because the convenient sources of ivory are gone, from North Africa. And then the Sahara has by this time dried out to become this massive barrier between North Africa and the rest of the continent.
So essentially what we're waiting for to begin this next phase of ivory trade, ivory exploitation, is really the trade routes, colonization of East Africa, Southern Africa.
Yeah.
Is that what we're waiting for?
Yeah, exactly. And, the development of these trade networks, now understand the dates here are approximations. I cannot give you exact dates because we just don't know. There's more research that's needed. More research is being done as I speak. So there's more to learn. But definitely from 1,800 years ago, okay, we see the development of trade networks along the east coast of Africa. So we're starting up in the Red Sea. And then we come down the Horn of Africa, and then we start coming down the east coast of Africa, heading southwards. And it takes time. And the pioneers of this trade route are quite frankly, people from the Middle East, led by the Persians, as they were known then. And then later on, we start to see what we generally refer to in most of the literature and stuff as basically just Arabs. That's the term that's used. And that hides a lot of variety, I know, but we're going to keep it a bit simple here. Otherwise, I get distracted.
We don't need you distracted because you know what happens. You just go down rabbit holes and we lose the conversation.
Well, absolutely. So one of the big things that starts to happen is as they're coming around the Horn of Africa, the guys basically realize, hey, this is untold riches here. Because before that, the east coast of Africa and Central Africa were mysteries. We didn't know, they didn't know anything about it. Yeah, how big was Africa? You look at all those early maps. Africa is always shown as this truncated little continent, looking like a squashed Australia in some maps and stuff like that. So they start to come down and they go, hang on, this place is huge and there's a lot of wealth. And again, the thing that they fixate on initially is elephant populations. Once they start landing along the coast and traveling inland, they realize, hang on, there's a lot of elephants here. And in the Middle East and into the Persia and the Turkey and that sort of area, the use and trade in ivory had never really stopped because they were getting stuff out of India, China, and also they were hunting their own populations at that time. They weren't reliant on an African source. But they come to Africa and they realize, hang on, these guys have got big tusks here. That's one of the early records that we have, is they comment in certain documents that, wow, there are big elephants here, but how do we hunt them? That becomes the next problem. But the other thing, unfortunately, that also attracts their interest immediately as well, so you've got elephants on one hand, is the people.
Slaves. Yeah.
Exactly. They want slaves. And these are to go into the Persian Empire, into the growing, what becomes known as the Ottoman Empire, and they're taking people out of here. And unfortunately, the rest of the story for a large part of the history here is those two themes are interconnected. It's blood and ivory, if you'd like to call it that, and it's the blood of people and it's the ivory from elephants, and the two are horrendously intertwined in a lot of this discussion. But I want to focus a lot bit more on the ivory for now.
So when does ivory really, I'm assuming in the beginning it's it's here and there, a couple of tons here, a couple of tons there. When do legitimate trading routes get set up, and what are we talking about in terms of quantity? You already mentioned Lobengula and Zim, but that may be a little bit further along down the timeline. But
Yes.
I'm sure the Mombasas of the world, the Dar es Salaams of the world, that kind of stuff, start becoming sort of hubs for
Mm-hmm.
ivory moving out of Africa.
Absolutely. So, from 600 AD, so 1,400 years ago, those major ports that you've mentioned, plus never forget Zanzibar. Zanzibar is the eternal ivory hub in East Africa from basically 200 AD, so 1,800 years ago, is the guys are starting to reach down that way. You have the initial travelers down there. And then we just see the expansion of Arab trade that also, again, that's a different talk entirely, but with the Arabs mixing in with Africans for trading purposes, and they also start to settle along the east coast of Africa, it creates the Swahili trading kingdoms, okay, that are so many familiar names, and it creates the Swahili as we now know them today, which we often use interchangeably as the language and as people. It gets, again, focus. With all those trading ports, we start to see a lot of ivory being exported out of Africa, certainly by 1,400 years ago. Now, there's no records as to exact quantities, but it's a lot. And how we know that is we start to see a proliferation of trading ports all along the east coast of Africa being opened up in a very rapid space of time. Within 100 years, we go from a handful of ports, maybe 5 to 10 of them operating from what is Somalia today all the way down to what is Kenya today, to suddenly having more than 50 ports known. That are in use at any one time. And it becomes this progression where you have these specialist traders who focus on certain ports and certain commodities, with ivory always being near the top of them. And some of them travel further down the east coast to get away from all the competition and over supply. And so you start to see them. Now, again, unfortunately, in my head at the moment, I don't have the exact dates for the founding of all of these ports. That's something I've got to do more reading on, because it's a big topic. But it's quite clear that all of these ports are being established to facilitate the trade of ivory from the interior to the mainland. And for us down here in southern Africa, we start to see a huge amount of interest in ivory. Kicking off from around 1,000 AD. Okay, that's how. So it takes 400 years for them to get all the way down from up there all the way down to us. And one of the things that is a mentioned reason in some early Arab documents that have been translated into English that I've been able to read. There's a fantastic series that came out in the 1890s, edited by a guy called George Teal, and he does all these documents of the Portuguese documents of the Arabian Peninsula as they related to southern Africa. There's some of them are like, this is one of his here. I've got a set of them here somewhere. So they're these lovely old books with all that sort of stuff. And this is one of the ones I've been reading. It's as racist as hell. I'll warn you now. It's awful, the racism. But some of the statistics in there from these translated documents are quite remarkable. And one of the things that they're talking about by 1,000 AD is they're already complaining about bottlenecks in supply of ivory from the interior to the coast. That some of these trading posts have been forced to switch, and they sound quite annoyed, like, damn it, there's no more ivory, now we have to trade more in slaves, that sort of thing. And you can see because slaves, as abhorrent as that practice was, with the practicalities of it, with the profit that people could make, at the coast, and then when they get them to the destination, ivory was a surer bet. So you can see the preference for ivory there. Again, as disgusting as the whole concept is, okay? So in this part of the world, in southern Africa, we've got early records, and most of the evidence actually comes from two sites in southern Africa. One is called Schroeder, which is on the Shashi-Limpopo confluence area. So basically, that's where Zimbabwe, Botswana, and South Africa all meet on our borders, in southern Zimbabwe for me. And Schroeder is one of the first large towns in southern Africa. And during excavations there in the 1970s, 1980s, archaeologists found a huge amount of ivory. Now, also remember, for us in this part of the world, ivory is not just from elephants. We also have warthog tusks, we have hippo teeth, and a whole bunch of other things. And conceptually, what's quite fascinating is in a lot of Southern African people's languages, tusks are not distinguished from other bones. They regarded a tusk as a bone, which is also quite a fascinating thing, which showed that locally tusks were of no interest or use before there was this foreign demand for it. Okay, that's the suggestion here by the language. If we don't have a word for something to make it special, what does it mean to you? It's a bone.
Yeah.
So that's quite fascinating to me. So in that Limpopo Basin area is where we have our earliest thing. The other settlement is actually at a place called Kwagandaganda, which is and in Dondwane, which is on the east coast in KwaZulu Natal as well. But I want to focus on Schroeder, because there the archaeologists found a huge amount of unworked ivory of both hippo teeth as well as elephant tusks as well. They also found jewelry that had been carved. They found ivory debris, which is the leftovers from when they are carving jewelry and other things. And the jewelry included things like big fat bracelets like this, beautifully done, as well as anklets, as well as potential earrings. Some of the stuff, when it comes to ivory in the archaeological record, it does not last well. That's why also our evidence is always so spotty and all this. When you find ivory during a dig, which I've only ever had that once in my life, and thank goodness we had someone who knew what they were about there, because I knew nothing at the time, to how to preserve it, because as soon as it's exposed to air after being buried for so long, it disintegrates. It's actually really annoying.
Interesting.
And this is why also some of our evidence for ivory can be somewhat limited.
Gone.
And it's gone. Yeah, it's like cloth. It's almost as once it's been buried for so long, and especially Zimbabwean soils are quite acidic by nature because of the granite geology here. So stuff just goes. Not everything, there's always exceptions. So, but what's quite fascinating is they're not hunting the elephants, we think, to get that ivory. Generally speaking, they're scavenging. They are going around, and if you don't mind, because I kept my notes from last time when the recording didn't work, so I just want to go through, if you remember, how we figure this out. And this is fantastic work done by one of my favorite archaeologists in Southern Africa, which is Professor Tim Forsman. He's just fantastic. Okay, so this is based on his work with colleagues in that area. One of the things that he looked at with his colleagues as part of a project is looking at what was important for people wanting to settle in that area. Was it the agriculture? Was it the trading opportunities? Was it something else entirely? And they asked the question, well, how important were elephants to these early people? Since we found all this evidence for trading and all that, how important were elephants? Where were they getting the ivory from? And what was it? So one of the things that they figured out, and I've cross-checked their references, not because I didn't believe them, but I want to see the primary evidence and stuff like that to see what else I could learn. So one of the fun things is to start off with, average elephant mortality rates are around between 1% to 5% per annum. And a lot of that depends on the rainfall. Droughts increase elephant mortality drastically. One of the things that they've estimated in the Shashi-Limpopo Basin today, the modern population of the elephants today is around 9,300 to 10,000 elephants between the three countries in that basin of the Limpopo where we are. So one of the things is if you take just even 1% mortality, we're going to have probably 194 carcasses a year of different ages also. Okay. Now, what's the average number of tusks per elephant, generally speaking? Mathematically, it's 1.9.
2.
Because we elephants break off tusks, they fracture and stuff happens. Some are born without tusks. So technically you can't always expect 2 tusks per elephant this is the fun of maths and statistics, which is not my forte, but luckily we've got clever people who can explain these
1.9.
There we go. So one of the things is if we're getting 194 carcasses a year, we've got 369 tusks of all sizes and weights already
Every
before
year.
we've killed this every year, before we've had to hunt a single elephant. So these
Mhm.
people are getting a huge quantity of ivory already, and not that they're going to find all 370 tusks a year, but when you look at the average over a number of years, you're always going to be coming across carcasses, pulling out the tusks and bringing them back for your use, whether you're trading the whole tusks or you are using them yourselves to make jewelry and ornaments and all that sort of stuff. Now, one of the other fun things to think about is how heavy were these tusks? Okay, so we can ignore probably 10% as infant mortality. So infant in an elephant is generally 5 years or younger. Okay,
Mhm.
because they
Mhm.
get those little milk tusks, and then which you never even see most of the time because they don't protrude from the lip. From personal experience, if you see, once you start seeing the tusks pushing out from the elephant's lips, as even the youngsters, that thing's over a year old already. So one of the things is pre-colonial times. This is where the fun of how you can make connections in archaeology. Pre-colonial times, one of the most prolific elephant hunters was William Finnerty. Okay. Now, in his book, he reports that he was hunting in this part of the world through northern South Africa. So he actually goes through that Shashi Limpopo and kills a few elephants. And then he comes up into Zimbabwe. He actually meets up with King Lobengula later on in his life. And that's another whole story with ivory being traded for guns and all that sort of stuff. But he actually reports that on average, he was getting tusks of about 11.5 kilos a tusk. Okay. So one of the things is what that suggests is that that's also possibly what the weight of the tusks going all the way back to Schroeder, 1,000 years ago. We were averaging, that's a fair average to assume based on that, because Finnerty is one of the first guys, white hunters, into that area, and the Limpopo Valley had not suffered, as had East Africa and northern Zimbabwe, from the attentions of pre-colonial elephant hunters in the same way. So one of the things is if you again, skipping over all the maths, I could write it out longhand and you can have a little thing pop up here. But basically, we work out that they could pick up in the bush at Schroeder 130 tons of ivory a year.
Okay.
Just picking it up before we've killed a single elephant. Okay. Now, that's the theoretical. Were they actually doing that? No, I don't think so. But that shows you the potential pool of ivory that before we've killed a single elephant. Now, that's not the big tuskers, of course, but this is just a nice little thought exercise to show you the extent of natural ivory that could have occurred from populations at that time.
Okay.
Now, from that period of time, we see increasing evidence for the use of ivory locally amongst the various kingdoms and empires that rise up in southern and eastern Africa. Great Zimbabwe, unfortunately, it was not archaeologists who dug it up, but a lot of the early looters and treasure hunters who dug holes everywhere there, report on finding, ivory pieces, ivory bangles, ivory fragments and stuff like this all over Great Zimbabwe, showing that there was a significant amount of ivory pulled through there. Unfortunately, none of those objects we don't know where they are, even if they still exist today, given the fragility of the ivory. But it shows that if we jump ahead again to the pre-colonial capital of Kami World Heritage Site, just outside of, it's less than 20 k's from where I'm sitting right now in Bulawayo. At Kami, during excavations there by professional archaeologists in the 1930s into the 1940s and 50s, they found a huge amount of ivory, showing that there was a local use of it, but also evidence for a lot of exporting of ivory as well. And at Kami, they found enormous tusks there. One of the tusks that they found, which again, unfortunately crumbled while they were trying to preserve it by painting it with resin, it just crumbled to dust. But the weight of that tusk when fresh was estimated at approximately 140 pounds.
Jeez.
Which shows big elephants. Now, what were they sending out if that's what they kept? And it was a part of a matched pair. So this was probably one giant individual, and where it was found on Kami was the hill, which is the king's palace
Well, you could
area.
almost think that they wouldn't have sent anything bigger out, because if you would have thought from a king's perspective, from a status perspective, you would keep the biggest for yourself.
Absolutely, but it shows the fact that there were big tuskers around. This time period that we're talking about now with Kami is approximately the year 1550, when those would
Okay.
have been hunted. Now that's a nice segue in some
When
ways.
does the
But at
trade,
Kami,
like, we talked about 130 pounds being able to be picked up and probably moved and traded and whatnot. So when does the serious ivory trade start kicking in Africa? Are
so
we talking about the 1500s, 1600s?
so there's two phases. Okay, the first is what I like to think of as the pre-Portuguese. Then there's the Portuguese period, and then to jump ahead is that period of that man I mentioned now, William Finnerty, which is the Victorian period. Okay, that's the third phase, and that one is the most devastating in terms of just sheer numbers of elephants that were hunted and simply for their ivory. So the early period from roughly 1000 AD to about 1550, let's call it, which is the period of when Mapungubwe, then Great Zimbabwe, and a lot of these pre-colonial cities were existing. We don't really have any trading records now that are available in English, to my knowledge. Okay, there's great estimates in all sorts of books, but I treat them with a huge amount of caution because I can never find out where they're getting those numbers from. I say, well, what should I read? There's one book that I've read where the guy estimates that, they were exporting 1,000 tons of ivory a year from Great Zimbabwe. And I said, nice, how did you figure that out? I don't know. He doesn't say, like I've just showed our thought experiment there with Mapungubwe, thanks to the work of Tim. But he doesn't. So I just treat that with suspicion. So we don't have numbers, but we do know it was a significant component of the trade. Equal in importance to gold being exported from this part of the world. So there's a lot of gold mining going on. Also, a lot of other metals are being exported from this part of the world, as well as other animal products. So hunting is
and
also
we
an
assume
essential
the same
part
thing is happening up all the way through East Africa at the same time too, right, Paul?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And East Africa is where the trade becomes, at the same time, it has become entrenched. And we see the rise of a lot of really, really famous elephant hunting peoples at that time. And I just have to, because I've got to make sure I'm pronouncing the names right. So I'm just pulling out my notes here. But one of the amazing things is we see the rise of specialist elephant hunters in East Africa and later on in Southern Africa from about 1300 AD, so roughly 700 years ago. And some of them, they last all the way through until colonization, from the late 1800s. So these are people like the Sukuma, the Kamba, the Waboni, the Wata. These are all peoples whose names still ring in East Africa today as great elephant hunters. And they had a lot of techniques for hunting elephants, and they had specific targeting, because of all the risk that they were going to go through. Many of them settle on using the same techniques overall, but a few of them have little quirks that differentiate them. But most of those names that I mentioned, it's geographical localities throughout East Africa, which in this term I mean to include Kenya, Tanzania, northern Malawi, northern Mozambique. Okay, in my brain, that's what I think of as East Africa specifically. Right. So with all these people, how did they hunt these elephants to get their tusks? So the first and foremost was the use of pit traps with spikes on the bottom. So they would cut down trees, carve the ends into spikes, often harden them in the fire, dig a huge hole on a narrow game trail, cover it over, and then try and stampede individual elephants if they were picking on one that had a particularly wonderful set of tusks that they wanted, and try and force it to run panic-stricken along these trails and fall into the hole, and then either they'd jump in and end its life, or they'd leave it to die. It's both are not ideal. But
can you imagine having the job that you're getting on the back of the elephant to slide the huge spear into its between its vertebrae?
No, that, and especially one that's already riddled with pain. They're probably targeting the big bull elephant. So you're already dealing with a
Jeez.
5 to 6 ton animal, and you've got to jump in on top of this thing. The
Unbelievable.
Kamba had also a nuanced way of hunting, that they used pit traps. They also used deadfalls, where they would string tripwires across paths, and they would have a weighted massive spear that was positioned to fall down vertically like that and pierce the vertebra somewhere along the lines of the elephant. This was proved to work very, very well, because any damage to the vertebra often would lame the elephant. It wouldn't kill it outright, making it easier to then run in with very long spears with massive spearheads. Some of these spearheads in metric are bigger than half a meter. So in American, I can never remember how many feet that is, but that's basically what's it? Yeah. Anyway, so
1.5, 2 feet. Yeah.
Yeah, so these are massive, massive spears. But the Kamba also had this technique, which was also used by the, for heaven's sake, I've just gone blank on their name, in Malawi, where they had some of these people would work in groups of 6 to 10. And in that group, you had one guy who carried a massive axe. Now, this is an axe like something out of your worst nightmares, okay, with this huge curving blade, like this long, thick handle designed to be held in 2 hands. And so what would happen is you'd have 2 of them whose job it was to carry these axes. So they'd lie in ambush for these elephants. And as the elephant would come past them, they would leap out and sever the tendons on the back feet of these elephants with a couple, hopefully just one, but maybe 2 strokes from their axes on both sides at the same time, and then run like mad. Because as the elephant goes down, it starts squealing, and it's quite a horrific thing. But then you've got the third guy, who begins as the elephant's going down. He is running out with another massive axe, or later visitors also saw him carrying a long spear with a short handle to run up the spine of the elephant and place it straight in between the vertebra behind the ears,
Jeez.
like that, to kill it. And at the front, you had another 2 guys who would be trying to distract the elephant from noticing who's running up. And what they would do is they'd ram the spear in. You're not going to sever the vertebra in one go. And they'd ram it in, and they'd have to hold on and then rock from side to side to open the wound while pushing down the whole time. It is brutal. It is courageous beyond words. And it was very, very effective. That these people, again, there's anecdotal evidence, stories and legends passed down from interviewees about what their grandfathers had done and stuff like that. But these guys could kill an elephant a day like that.
Jeez, unbelievable.
Yeah.
And obviously poisoned arrows were used too. I remember reading in that book, White Hunters, Black Poachers, the guys, covering themselves in dung, elephant dung, essentially, and sneaking in between the, as close as possible and throwing a poisoned arrow in there. And
absolutely, and the variety of poisons that they made use of is something we know of archaeologically, because there's residues that have been found on spears collected and stuff like that. So there's a wide variety of plant and animal toxins that have been used. That would some of the poisons would not necessarily kill the elephant, but they'd incapacitate it to such an extent that it would wither and die. So the one thing that I want to point out as well is that, so we don't know the numbers that these guys are killing, but if they, like you've got we don't know how many people are hunting elephants at this time. We don't know if it was their full-time job or if they were doing it in the winter months with ambushes at waterholes and stuff like that, which would make more sense than trying to do it in summer where the elephant populations just bombshell to every source of water and food.
Yeah.
You're wanting them to concentrate where you can also identify individuals. I think that at this time, with these professional hunters, they would have been targeting them because it's a lot of risk for the reward. So you would have been targeting large tusked individuals, which are probably, the big males over 50 years of age. And choosing them to hunt. Now, one of the things is we know that most of that ivory is leaving Africa and going to the Middle East and Asia, especially India and Sri Lanka. Those are the markets.
This is in this first phase. This first phase, 1500s, 1600s. Yeah.
Yeah, so from 1,000 years ago to 400 years ago, basically, that is where you've got your big focus is shipping all the ivory over to there. Now, there's a potential for a fascinating project, which would be to go and look at museum objects, ancient ivory, and do isotopic analysis on those things. Which is possible as the technology gets better, and you could provenance that ivory. You could figure out where did those elephants come from, because they've got these massive databases they've developed for anti-poaching and anti-trafficking now. So there's no reason that it couldn't apply further back in time to give us clues, and that you could look at music. And I know that there's been a couple of people looking at this from South African museum ivory. So it'd be amazing to get into Asia, India, Sri Lanka, and see ancient ivory, and then we could start saying, "Hey, look here, we've found statistically, 70 museum objects. 35 of them are coming from the Serengeti area. So that shows that there was a lot of activity from in this period when these things were carved. You know what I mean?" So that would be something cool, because it would really give us some microscopic ideas about where were these elephants also being hunted, what were the hunting grounds, and what were the ancient ranges of these elephants. One thing we do know about prehistoric, it's very dangerous to speculate on some of this because we don't have precise numbers. But one thing that we do know is from 1000 AD on the east coast of Africa, elephants were seen along the coastline. That's how prolific the populations were, from there going all the way inland through the Great Lakes area, all the way towards the forests. Okay, the tropical jungle, as we think of it today.
Yeah, there's elephants everywhere.
There was elephants everywhere. We have no idea what the populations were, but something that again which I haven't done yet. Okay, so this could be another talk. But one thing I've been doing is every source I can, I'm looking at their trade numbers of amounts of ivory being exported, thinking of what's an average weight for that area at that time, and then looking at the individuals that were being hunted and exported or ivory collected. It's not always easy to say which is which, but just saying, okay, there's this many dead elephants for this many tusks coming out of this port, this area, this area. So that's a thing I've just started doing. And that's why there's so many books on my desk at the moment. But also, it's really become fascinating to me. So just a couple of tasters here, okay? In the 16th, in the early 16th century, one of our main ports that's been operating is Sofala. Now, Sofala had been established from 800 years ago plus, all right, on the East African coast. And it gets really confusing because there were 2, perhaps 3 ports, all with the name Sofala, but in different locations. So I'm talking about the southernmost Sofala, which was just north of where the Savi-Lundi River empties into the Indian Ocean.
So this is Mozambique. Right? Sofala's in Mozambique.
Yes. Yep. So that means the ivory's coming out of my part of the world here, Southern Africa, from anywhere from Wangi, Chobe, all the way down to the Limpopo Valley, Kruger area, then to the coast. Okay, this is the potential sources of this ivory getting there.
Yep.
So one of the things is there's a fascinating early book before the Portuguese take over, because Portuguese come into our part of the world and start taking over all these Arab Swahili trading posts in phases, but starting from the year 1510. That's when they take over everything in Mozambique. Then they push up towards Zanzibar. Then they try and take Mogadishu, but that proves to be too troublesome and they retreat back down, But they interrupt and they try and take over the trade. So just before the Portuguese arrive and start interrupting the trade, is records in this set of 26 volumes by Teal, where he reports anecdotal evidence, but from translated Arab documents which were found in for heaven's sake, forgive me, I've just gone blank on the name in the middle of the city in the Middle East from that time. But anyway, they show that an average of 30,000 pounds of ivory was exported from Sofala every year for a century.
Okay.
So 30,000
for a century.
For every year. So you times 30,000 by 100. Okay, that's 100
by
years.
100.
30,000 pounds a year. Yes, 3 million pounds of ivory in a century. Now let's pretend that our average elephant tusk weight is 80 pounds. All right, because we're not going for the let's
go back to what the data was: 11.5 kilos.
Yes. All right.
All right,
And
that's what you have. That's the piece of data that you
yeah,
have. So
okay, yeah,
11.5 kilos. So let's just call it
correct.
35 pounds. Let's just
35 pounds into how many elephants is that?
85,700 elephants.
Okay. So that's just from Sofala. Now, remember, at that time, there were 6 other trading ports in the same vicinity north of Sofala. So you could
all
technically
pulling from the same area, do you think?
From the same area, absolutely. So now you times that by 6. Times that number of how many elephants? 85,000 by 6.
500,000 elephants.
Yes, in a century killed in our part of the world.
In the 1500s, 1400s.
In the 1400s into the early 1500s. Okay,
and we have no idea of the percentage. Like we have no idea the percentage. Like if this is 500,000 taken over a century, I wonder how many elephants it could be.
Yeah,
like,
I've read estimates of elephant populations in the Portuguese era or in southern Africa, and I don't know how they get to these numbers. Okay, but for example, I was just reading. Where the hell have I put it now? It's somewhere here. There's a book by Keith Somerville on Ivory where he's very skeptical of data as well. He's great. I really enjoyed reading his books as well. But he says that there was an estimated 4 million elephants in southern Africa, which again I think is, I don't know where he got that number from, but he says this is one potential source. Another estimate.
I could see that. I could absolutely see that, given the space that we have for 500,000 elephants right now. There was unlimited space for 4 million. I get that. That's definitely possible.
Yeah, and again, it's going to sound brutal, but you're killing 500,000 elephants in a century, with a population of that size. We're just trimming the branches there, really, as humans at that time. Now, into the Portuguese era, this is when things really start to accelerate in the hunting of elephants for ivory as well. And again, I'm still working on numbers and stuff like that. So if you don't mind, I want to ignore the Portuguese era for now and jump to the Victorian era, because that's
and the Victorian era is weird. Portuguese they do damage, right? They accelerate beyond the 30,000 of Sofala on an annual basis, right? There may be an order of magnitude up, but it doesn't touch what happened in the colonial era and the Victorian era.
Correct. Yes, and one of the reasons why it accelerates with the Portuguese, and I've got a couple more things to read, which is why I want to skip it for now, because I have a feeling they're going to be fun. But one of the reasons why it accelerates with the Portuguese is they come in and they just start trading guns for ivory. And that is the tone of the elephant hunting and trade in southern and eastern Africa for the next 400 years. Is when the Portuguese come in here. The fascinating thing to me is that the whole trade networks shift as well under the Portuguese. The focus then stops being India and the Middle East and Sri Lanka for the export of ivory. It now becomes Europe. And once their desire for ivory is reawakened from the 200 AD to 400 AD, when ivory as a commodity just sort of disappears from Europe. Mm-hmm. As we're going into Europe with the rise of the Portuguese, and also the upheavals in Christianity at that time, leading to mass creation of religious iconography and jewelry and stuff like that, the Portuguese are supplying a massive amount of ivory into Europe at that time, and they just come in with guns, because in Africa, the people are like, no, we want those things that you've got. We got no interest in your blankets. We got no interest in glass beads anymore. We don't have interest in you. Bring us guns and gunpowder and bullets and lead. That's what we want. And now that becomes the main trade commodity. Guns first, everything else, cloth. Yes, we all know that that's still a commodity for trade. But what do these ivory hunters and traders want before anything else is guns? And there's a whole bunch of fun stuff, which I'll talk again, what was the rate of exchange? One gun was worth how many pounds of ivory? And so that's something for another time, if you don't mind, because I'm still working on
So
thinking about.
let's the Victorian age. When does that start? The Victorian
So for me, in
British
Southern
colonial.
Africa, 1840s. Okay,
Okay,
and why I've got that date is because that's when we really start to
less
see
than
the
200
penetration
years
of the
ago.
empire. Yeah, yeah. And it's why I picked that area. Of course, there's been elephant hunting before that in the Cape and along the east coast of Africa. But by the 1840s, what's starting to happen is it's the rise of the professional elephant hunter to supply ivory to Europe and North America. That is the whole
And does North
focus.
America come online about the same time as Europe, or is it a lag?
Yes. There's a slight lag, but the demand for ivory in North America and Western Europe really explodes from the 1840s. It's the Industrial Revolution. It's the creation of a settled middle class with money to spare for luxury goods, but it's also increasing mechanization to create and market these what do you call it? These luxury goods, and we start to see the rise of in both areas. So, for example, what I mean by that, and it's going to sound really funny to us in the modern world, but ivory used for combs for your hair. It's something I don't know how to do. That's why I have to keep my hair short. Otherwise, it's I don't know what a comb looks like. I've been told about them, but ivory combs. And there's actually a guy which I always remember his surname for obvious reasons, and I can never remember his bloody first name. Oh no, it's Phineas. So there's a guy in 1799. Okay, develops a machine, and his name is Phineas Pratt. And he gets a patent in New York for a machine that stamps out ivory combs. And this is the start of American demand for African ivory, because he had tried mammoth ivory, he had tried Indian elephant ivory when he was developing his patent, did not work and he had also tried ivory from West Africa. All inferior to what's coming out of our part of the world, Eastern and Southern Africa. So he puts this in his patent documents and stuff like that. And one of the things that then starts to happen is this just explodes demand, because now you can mass produce these things. You don't necessarily have the carvers one by one making these combs. They can be cut out and stamped and all. You should look up the patent documents. They're quite. This machine looks like a Frankenstein monster, but it's amazing that, of course, it gets refined and all that. And then after that, we start to see similar things going on for making mirrors, the handle and holding for the mirror for people of leisure, became a fashionable thing to own
and then
mirrors.
Billiard balls and the keys on pianos.
And so on and so forth. And when I talk about some of these mirror cases and stuff, it's that. People are making this with ivory. Look at how
super
this
detailed.
one is a bit earlier. This is not quite the Industrial Revolution phase, but this is why. Ivory, in my opinion, was the plastic of its age. Okay, because you could shape it so easily and so beautifully into so many useful and also frivolous things as well. And this is when we start to see the rise of the demand. So this is not something Africa controls either. What we are controlling is the provision of ivory to these markets, and it creates an entrepreneurial class here in Africa. But these people, the wealth is not because of development, it's just because of trade. It's a bit like the situation in Africa at the moment, where we're merely exporting so much, and what are we developing at home? But that's a different conversation. Okay, but it's a similar, like history. Anyway, so one of the things is with Pratt's work and others, this really explodes this sort of thing, and it's also regrettably linked to the slave trade out of into North America at that time as well, because a lot of the time the ivory is being brought out using enslaved peoples to carry the tusks to the coastline, and then from there they're loaded onto ships and brought over. Now, a lot of the slaves coming out of our part of the world end up in Asia and the Middle East, but you see people in ivory are interlinked in this story, because a lot of the ivory coming to the east coast of Africa, there's a minority of slaves from East Africa make it to North America and the Caribbean islands and all that, but there are some. there's work being done on this sort of thing, but it explodes. And again, here's a couple of statistics for you. Okay, now let's look at our main port of Zanzibar, which becomes the linchpin of the ivory trade in Eastern and Southern Africa. Wherever we're sending it to the coast, it makes its way to Zanzibar and then spreads out around there, even during the colonial period as well, because you've got all the white hunters and their allies, their black allies, coming from the coast inland, hunting, coming back to the ports, and everything getting. Zanzibar was the ivory entrepot. It was where all the trade was funneled through. So here's something, again, just for some fun statistics. All right. Export records at Zanzibar, and this is from a fantastic book by an archaeologist called Freeman Grenville, who went into some of the documents and stuff. Again, it's a big, beautiful, I don't know where I've put it, but it's a very beautiful book, I must say. But one of the things is export records from Zanzibar show they used to use a standard weight called a frasilia, which is 34 pounds. That was their standard unit of weight for measuring ivory for export. Now, one of the things is that the export of ivory from Zanzibar, and I'll tell you proper numbers, but between the late 1820s to the 1870s, the export tripled. From the 1820 number to 1870, it was tripled. Okay. And then from 1870 to 1890, it tripled again. So that is your real boom for the whole world. That is the zenith of ivory as a global commodity legitimately. Okay.
From 1870 to the
1890. That is the real boom.
Okay.
In my opinion. I'm using those numbers from Zanzibar. So to give you an idea, just from Zanzibar alone, all right, between 1790 and 1875. Okay, that's a long time period. I know, 1790 to 1895. So it's basically 1875. Just from Zanzibar alone, the importing of ivory just into the UK, Great Britain. In 1790, they were importing 125 tons of ivory a year from Zanzibar.
125. Okay.
125 tons in 1790. By 1875, they are importing 670 tons a year of ivory into Great Britain alone from Zanzibar.
Now, but we believe that, but Zanzibar is a funnel, right? Are there other places shipping out ivory at the same time, or is it like everything's going to Zanzibar and it out of Zanzibar?
For us in Southern Africa, we've also got Cape Town, we've got Durban, Lourenco Marques, Maputo. In Mozambique is also a significant port. I have not had the time to look up trade statistics and stuff, because Zanzibar is the fascination to me at this moment in time.
So 670 tons per year are going to Europe alone.
To the UK. We haven't even got to France, Germany.
Okay, just to one country.
Just to the UK. America, for the same time period, goes from around 100 tons a year for North America, US and Canada, okay, to nearly 2,000 tons a year.
Wow.
And that's just from Zanzibar.
Jeez.
So how many elephants are being killed a year? Conservatively, we're looking at, again, a couple of 100,000 elephants a year minimum being killed. Again, numbers are not my forte. All right.
How many kilos in a ton? 100, right?
No. It's 1,000 kilos.
1,000.
To a ton. Yeah.
So 2.8 million kilograms of ivory to the UK and to America alone. Okay. So let's just do that divided by the 11.5 kilo number that we had back in the day.
Yeah, just for the jitter, as we call it.
250,000 elephants per year to two countries. 250,000 elephants per year to two countries.
And that's just from one port. Don't forget.
From one port, from, what do we say, from 1870 to 1890?
1870, yeah. So that's just from one port. That's Zanzibar, because by 1890, Zanzibar controls at least 1/4 of ivory exports.
How many ports do you think there are? 3? Should just be conservative.
Well, okay. Are we talking East Africa only first? There's at least 5 major ports. of which Zanzibar is the major, because you've got Kilwa as well, which had
Okay, so
risen and
4
fallen,
plus
risen and
Southern
fallen. You've got
Africa. Give me
Pemba.
some more from Southern Africa.
Well, Southern Africa, by that time, we've got Cape Town, we've got Durban, we've also got Maputo, but they are not reaching the same numbers as Zanzibar. That one is very,
let's just say 5. Okay, let's combine the 4. Let's combine the 4 down there. Let's just go. We'll even be more conservative. Let's go 4. Okay.
Right.
I've times it by 20 because of the 20-year gap, right? 1870 to 1890, and now I'm going to times it by 4. That is 20 million elephants. If you went on the 11.5 kilo number.
Oh my word, it's boggling, isn't it? And the how precise that number is, we can argue, and the records are imprecise, but it gives us an idea of the staggering scale of what is going on in Africa. Okay. And when you start to get to the time where we have written records and guys producing their own books like William Finnerty, Cornwallis Harris, and so on and so forth, Salou, all these sort of guys, and you start totting up what they were personally killing a year, but then also several of them employ black hunters to go out and hunt ivory for them. And then they would trade with them, and then they would ship it to the coast themselves. You start to get a bewildering idea. George Westbeach of Panamatenga was reported to shoot 700 elephants a year personally for their tusks. Panamatenga, so in the Chobe, Northern Wangi, and Southern Zambia. But he employed over 100 other black hunters, which he armed and sent into Angola, sent into Zambia, sent into Botswana, Zimbabwe to hunt for him as well. So you can imagine, and all of them would be hunting the elephants with guns. He gave them guns, and they would come back with their ivory. And again, that's another Panamatenga and its role in early hunting in this part of the world is worth, again, wow, I could distract myself, but focus, because one of the things is, I just want to tell you that your figure of 20 million gels with my own scribblings here, which are indecipherable half the time, but also with one of the estimates I read in Somerville's book, which was then referenced to one of these articles here, which is absolutely brilliant, which everyone who wants to read this here, I could email it to you or whatever, but this is The Exploitation of Elephants for the Ivory Trade, a Historical Perspective by E.J. Milner Gulland and J.R. Beddington, and this is published in 1993. And they also have certain interesting statistics and graphs and all that, but it's actually, you can find it's available without having to pay for it, through one of those academic paywalls and stuff. And they also have some sources that I'm following up. But one of the things is they point out the records are incomplete and also often imprecise. Some they think are wildly overestimated. But one of the things that fascinates me is they suggested that between 1840 and 1890, so for 50 years, over 20 million elephants were killed in Eastern and Central Africa, which includes Zimbabwe. So we're ignoring South Africa.
I didn't even know that number.
Yeah.
And how
so I love it because but I love it because there we've just fiddled around, but we've come to a similar thing as a published document. And one of the other things is that when you start fiddling with that sort of information, oh boy, like we start to get some really, really fun stuff. Because to bring it back to what we had started with, because I am conscious of time. I don't know how long we got and how long you want this to be.
There's only two people still listening to this, so it's, it'll just keep going.
But, to bring it back to what we had started off with talking, what does this imply with that absolute slaughter, okay, in such a short space of time? And yet we still have large tusked elephants today. So what does that imply about genetics and how things are passed on? I think the first thing it does is tell us, even with all the research that's been done, we still need to better understand how tusks are determined through genetics, diet, environmental factors, and also, a whole host of other things that I think the focus on just looking at we're just killing off all the big tuskers is perhaps the wrong.
And that's really it, right? We're focusing on that. We're killing off all these big tuskers, and that's going to lead to their demise. That there will never be a big tusker left in Africa. I call bullshit, because of we are nowhere close to the persecution that has occurred on elephants in southern and eastern Africa over time. And it's not just one persecution, like the biggest, obviously from 1850 to 1890. We haven't talked about the things that happened in the 1900s, the big poaching scandal that happened in, the 2010s that decimated, Tanzanian elephants by 60%. Kenyan elephants by 60-70%, and they've still got massive tuskers in Amboseli and Tsavo. So I agree. I think that there's probably 4 or 5 factors that drive big tusked elephants, namely time, nutrition. I think those 2 factors play a major role. Yes, genetics for sure, but I don't think genetics play as big of a role as we think, because of the fact of these super bottlenecks over time of these elephant populations multiple times. It's not just once, multiple times. And you've still got big boys walking around today.
Yes, and what, one thing I will say, okay, is again, and now I'm speaking as a layman here on this particular topic, but certainly when you look at the average weights of tusks coming out of this part of the world, there has been a decrease in the average weight of tusks over the last 50 years, including what's been recovered by people chasing after the illegal trafficking in ivory and stuff like that, and also your average weights of hunted elephants. But we know that the hunters are not just targeting the big tusked individuals, especially the most ethical hunters and stuff like that. It does happen, and it's, as long as the thing is done legally, what are we going to say? But one of the things is, I completely agree with time, that also I think with some of our elephant management, and also the increasing bottlenecks of space and nutrition for elephants as the human population has grown out into areas that elephants used to traverse and all that, we're seeing elephants perhaps not living as long as they used to in certain areas, and not reaching their full potential. Because when you read the big man's Bible here, which is Smithers, for every guide and hunter, everything like this, for us in the southern African region, this is an earlier edition, and I've got the new one lying around just somewhere. But they talk about how the tusks, the girth of the tusk will nearly double in the last 20 to 15 years of the elephant's life. So that's from the age of 50 to 65, give or take, and so some of these elephants, what are the ages that they're dying at? What is elephant mortality in parks and protected areas and stuff like that? I don't know.
I don't think we're seeing elephants live to 65.
Yeah.
Like, the best data set we have is Kruger's, and Kruger,
yes,
there wasn't an elephant over 56.
Uh-huh.
So, it's
and that's because of us.
I think there's just the Kruger system is is as human free as possible, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Paul,
but as we humans who've pushed them into areas, we've destroyed certain areas for their nutrition by promoting agriculture and all this sort of stuff. What are we thinking here? And I've been treasuring this book in preparation.
Give me 2 books, because people are going to be listening to this and go like, man, I'd love to read up more. And you have shared a couple of books with me. If people are fascinated in getting into it, what are the books that they should be trying to find?
Okay, if you want to revel in the beauty of elephants with large tusks, and to appreciate also a lot of good science and ecology explained in an entertaining manner, you can do no better than this book, Great Tuskers of Africa, by Johan Marais and David Hadaway. I warn you, however, this thing is one of those books that was produced one printing and then became a collector's item and is now very, very cheeky prices. But if you can afford it, please get it. It came out in 2006, and it was I think they reprinted it once or twice. Mine is 2006. So I don't know if it was. I think it was reprinted at least once.
$395 right here.
You can borrow mine when you come down. If you come into the AGM, I'll bring it for you. You know,
pre-owned.
Another fascinating book is to look for Keith Somerville's, and I'm afraid I don't know where I've put my copy of it here, but Keith Somerville's book is Ivory in Africa. That one is just remarkable. He's an investigative journalist, but he has done fantastic.
Ivory
history.
Is it Ivory, Power and Poaching in Africa? Is that it?
Yes, that's it. And it's a most marvelous book because the first half of it is looking at some of these historical trends in ivory acquisition through hunting and trade and all this, and then the other half of the book is a wonderful polemic, in my opinion, on the need for humans to do better for elephants and ivory, the ivory trade and all that sort of stuff. There's also quite a few. I'd hate to recommend them because they're quite hard to find. But there's some fabulous early books on ivory and its use and production and that sort of stuff. You can find, if do yourself a favor, go to the Internet Archive. It's a free not-for-profit website that hosts PDFs and other copies of many books that are now out of copyright. And do yourself a favor, just type in African elephant or ivory and start looking at some of those books that were coming out in the 1880s, 1890s. There's a lot of the early, and you can read them for free on the website. You can even, they let you download some of them depending on the copyright laws and all that sort of stuff. But there's some fabulous stuff in there, including also what ivory was used for. Because like as a fun, well, maybe it's not fun, but here's a little thing just to end to perhaps, I don't want to run away, but I'm conscious of time here. But one of the things, because I wrote this down, here's a fun one for an American audience. Okay. If you live on the East Coast of America and your family came over to work in the nascent industries as they were developing from the 1840s onwards, because the East Coast had gone into a massive trade slump with the stopping of fur trapping and all that sort of stuff, is one of the things is trade in ivory from Africa to North America was responsible for some major industrial revivals on the East Coast of North America, both mainly USA, but also Canada to a large extent, because in two ways. Number one was a lot of people set up ivory workshops to start making these billiard balls and piano keys and all that sort of stuff along the East Coast, and they couldn't do that without getting the ivory from Africa. But also it is where the major textile industries that used to dominate the industry of the East Coast of the United States were all driven by the trade with Africa. Because, so for example, the first steam-powered cotton mill in North America was built in Naumburg, Salem in Massachusetts, specifically to make cloth to export to Africa, to trade for ivory, to bring back to North America.
Okay? That is amazing.
Now, that's something that's kind of fun because this is where if you've been to East Africa, they always talk about menkani, the trade cloth. That's where it comes from. It was originally made in Massachusetts to send there because that's what they saw some on early sailors. They said that's the cloth we want, and now they start going back through the networks as they would have been that time, and they realize, hang on, we need to make a lot more of this much faster, and so you start to see development like that, and then that spurs on the textile industry that revives the East Coast and makes it into one of the economic powerhouses even today. They built on that legacy.
The economic powerhouse of the East Coast was all driven by ivory.
In the periods just before the Civil War and just after it, that was it. That's what gave them the money.
That started it.
Yes, and again, I'm not downplaying other things, but that is one of the big things. Also, when you look at again, this should be another chat and all that, because I've still got like all these notes here, you see, like this, which I haven't even looked at yet for this talk. But I've got statistics on like the factories producing ivory products in the States and the number of jobs, the number of sorry, not the number of, the amount of wealth being generated at that time. Because, like I've said, ivory was the plastic of its time. So you start to see American homes, where we in Africa. Okay, this is the scene in Africa. This is a picture from the Smithsonian, so it is copyright free, as far as I'm aware. But this is what is leaving Africa, and also look at the size of those tusks. My heavens, just something else entirely. All right, and then this is what Americans are consuming. That is all ivory inlaid furniture, carved with wood and all this. But this is so this is what we left with in Africa, and this is what's being done. And again, I'm not accusing underdevelopment and stuff like that, but one fed into the other in many different ways, and I think, just to end, because we've talked about this a couple of times in other settings and all that sort of stuff, but I thought what would just be fun, and maybe you can do it as an insert better, is to end with a picture of the largest, since we've been talking about big tuskers and all that. So the largest tusks on record, there they are in Zambia before they leave.
Zambia, not Tanzania, not Kenya.
Zanzibar. Sorry,
Zanzibar. That's right.
Apologies. Zanzibar.
Yeah.
So one of the things is when we go back to our young man here, who is one of my all-time heroes, with Smithers, records that this pair of tusks, the heaviest on record, is the first tusk has a mass of 102.3 kilograms, and the other has a mass of 97 kilograms. And those are the heaviest.
I thought it was like 220, 210 kind of thing with the weights.
Yeah. So again,
now somebody would say we don't have those anymore. That's an indication of how we're changing big tuskers. There's none of these 200-pounders anymore.
Well, what I would counter that with is I say, well, how common were they back then?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, it's not like there's 10 of those records, right? There's one of them, right?
And there's, it's a bit like humans, where we get the guy who's 7'2". There's one a generation, because it's a there's a lot of factors that combine for that, and it's not because the misrepresentation that frustrates me, as we were discussing about a certain website, is cherry picking of data, but also presenting certain things as facts without acknowledging the paucity of evidence for the stances that they might hold. And on top of that, what also frustrates me is they present the idea that all of the elephants were this size. And every elephant had big tusks like this. No, but that's the same way that they misrepresent, like you started off with what hunters do. They are doing this. That I read the website after we had discussed it and all the rest of it, which is a very large website, and I got really annoyed, because every time it's presented as this is what it was always like, but again, it's not. They stand out to us because we like to see things that are bigger than the usual, bigger than expected, and then in our heads that becomes, oh well, this must have been what it was always like.
That Schrader's data, that's fascinating data, right? That elephant average weight of 11.5 kilos shows you that if it was true that all these elephants were way bigger, then your average should have been 25 kilos. And
again, our data is also incomplete and imprecise and not as specific as we would like, but it has a lot more. We show our working. Let me put it that way. It's like maths when you're doing long division before calculators, and you show your work. How did you get to your answer? Because there's more points for that than just giving me an answer, and that's something that nuance is one of the reasons why I love my job. I'm always that guy who goes, well, actually, and I don't mean to be condescending. I try never to be condescending, because I'm always learning.
That's why we love you, man. It's like, that's the thing. We live in facts. We try and live in truth, man. And if you've got a statement, say it and then back it up.
Yeah, and that's the joy, it really is, and that's why I also love your podcast. I listen to almost every episode as it comes out as soon as I can. I'm a bit behind now because I've had the glorious joys of being in the bush for most of the last 2 months.
Yeah, and then you got sick too.
Yes, I did. There's this. The less said about that, the better, especially
Good.
in public. But it's it's just a joy. And also, what I will say, especially on this topic, the more I've learned, the less I know.
Mm-hmm. Well, isn't that the fact with most topics? Paul Hubbard,
But
thank
boy,
you
oh
so
boy,
much,
it's
my
been
man.
fun.
Thank you, my man.
I really appreciate
thank
it.
you.
Thank
We'll
you.
definitely do it again and again and again. So, thank you.
100%. Thank you so much, Robbie. Take care.